Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. Very excited for part two, where we had Jim Tompkins join us, Matt and myself, who co-hosted the episode, to talk all things supply chain. And we had so much great feedback from it that we're super excited to do part two. So, Jim, thank you so much for joining us for another episode.
Thank you, Chad. Good to be back. And Matt, good to see you as well. So
Yeah.
you guys haven't changed at all. You still look the same. In fact, I think, Matt, you have the same shirt on, but that's okay.
I think I had a sweater on last time in my defense, but but I may have the same one on. I may.
Okay. Mental image, it looks the same. Yeah. All
Yeah.
good.
Okay. I'm an AI generated actual. This isn't even me right now.
That's coming pretty soon, actually.
That's right.
Yes,
That's why
I
I
was going
brought
to
it
say
up.
the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Coming very soon. Yes.
That's why I brought it up.
So Matt, thanks as well for joining me to co-host with this episode. Jim, if you're good with it, why don't we jump right into it and just get a high-level overview of what's going on in the supply chain industry, and just to perhaps a little bit of context. I'm fascinated with it because it has such an important role in everything that we do, but it seems that it doesn't get talked about a whole lot. It kind of still stays outside of the mainstream media. It's still difficult getting a sense on what's going on. So with all your expertise and all the people that you're talking about, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the issues? What are some of the highlights right now in global supply chains?
Well, it's interesting because we travel in different circles, and that's what makes this a fun podcast. In the circles I travel, I hear about supply chain once every 3 minutes, I think. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's taking place, and it's just absolutely crazy the types of things that are occurring. For example, Biden putting tariffs on products coming in from Mexico. We have a free trade act with Mexico. A big hullabaloo was put in place, and so the Chinese read the same newspapers I do, and in the Wall Street Journal it talks about the tremendous amount of trade between Mexico and the United States, and so China reads that and say, wow, we can't export steel and aluminum into the United States directly without paying a high tariff. So what we're going to do is we're going to sell it to Mexico. Mexico will take our steel, our aluminum, put it in their product, and then they can ship to the United States without paying a tariff. Well, Biden correctly said, no, that's not going to happen. And in fact, if the product is made with China steel, there will be a 25% tariff when it comes in from Mexico to the United States. Even though it's manufactured in Mexico, it's manufactured with China steel, and we're not going to allow that to happen. And with aluminum, same deal, but it's a 10% tariff. And so that is really an interesting reality that we have unity between the Republicans and the Democrats on what's happening. And also we have unity between the Republicans and Democrats when the new administration comes in, whoever that is, they're talking about 50, 60% tariffs on China. And what that does is that furthers the nearshoring, the reshoring type of activity. And what we're seeing is a huge shift of product flowing from China to the West Coast, from China through the Panama Canal, which, although we're getting a little bit of rain down there and we're adding a ship or two a day going through the Panama Canal, we're still down from max capacity. And so the volume is coming east. And so it's not coming in California. So California ports are going to slow down in volume, and they already are. And the East Coast ports are going to grow. Well, the problem with the East Coast ports growing is two things. Number one, the ILA is probably going to go out on strike October 1st and shut the ports down because they control 37 ports on the East Coast and the Gulf. Or number two, they're going to continue to push anti-automation, which results in the most inefficient ports in the world because the union will not allow the ports to use technology. And in fact, they began the negotiation on the contract in June. The union, the ILA, walked off the situation and said, we're not going to meet until September 1st. And now it's turned out to be September 4th and 5th when they're going to get together to just air the original issues. And so the issues are going to be aired on September 4th and 5th. The contract is up on September 30th. And last week, the ILA said, and don't even think about us working past September 30th without a contract. It's not going to happen. And so we got the shift from west to east, and then we got the east and the Gulf potentially being closed. And so a tremendous amount of disruption taking place, and that resulting in a lot of difficulties. The further tariffs that the Republicans and Democrats will both be putting in have an impact on it. And so that is huge. Another huge impact that we do read about, the Supreme
Jim,
Court.
I'm sorry to interject. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Because I think that's an interesting topic right now. So I've had the opportunity to tour the port in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, where there is significant automation happening. And so for our viewers, what that looks like is you have these basically chassis that are just flatbeds running around this port with someone or multiple people that are offsite who are controlling these chassis moving around the port, where when you offload a container, you put it on this chassis and it's moving around without any human involvement, right? Which has increased that efficiency for that port. And so when we talk about someone like the ILA who's saying we do not want further automation happening and it only puts us behind in efficiency globally in terms of how we operate our ports, what do you see as a path forward, if there is one, for them to reach some kind of agreement where there is some kind of compromise as we try to maintain our competitiveness with the rest of the world and how we efficiently bring containers into this country, especially as you have these East Coast ports increasing in volume?
So there's a tremendous amount of technology that's applicable using automated guided vehicles. You call them chassis. That's what they look like, but they're actually automated guided vehicles, AGVSs. AGVSs can handle up to 35 tons, which is one container. And now there's a company in China making an AGVS that can handle up to 65 tons. I'm involved in a project in Malaysia, which is a very long, narrow port where the ships park out at the end and there's no laydown yard there. And so every container has to go 2 miles to the wider part of the island, but you can't build a port there because you don't have the deep water. So you have the deep water out here, you take the containers off the ship, you go 2 miles for the laydown and storage and so forth. In that port that we're involved with in Malaysia, what we're going to find is 65-ton AGVs, which is very large. And when they get to the end of it, a automated crane will come and pick them up off the automated guided vehicle and stack them in the yard. There is no need for labor. Rotterdam, which is in the top 10 of highest productivity ports in the world, is a very cool port, a very neat one to be in. I've visited there a couple of times. There's not a single port in the United States that ranks in the top 50 for productivity. The New Jersey, New York is, I think, ranked number 179 on the most productive. They're 179, so they're in the rivalry for the worst productivity of the port in the world. And the big battle that the ILA is going after the USMX for is a automated gate, where the gate is operated when the truck comes up. There's not a person that pushes the button. The gate is automated. So is that really port automation? If I gave a 2-hour lecture on port automation, I would not include gate automation as a portion of the port. That's not what we're talking about. But the ILA is putting a firm line in the sand. So it's a major, major, major issue. And what it's doing is it's forcing people to think about moving offshore, maybe moving more to Panama, more to Costa Rica, more to the Dominican Republic, and different locations. And so it's forcing people to think about how can we do things offshore so we don't have to deal with the union problem. And we also have the disruption of these strikes every 4, 5, 6 years that is very disruptive because you have to plan for that. And so it's really a major problem. So That's
So, Jim, maybe a second part to my question is this. You and I have talked a lot about, and we talked a lot about in our last podcast about optionality, right? Versus optimality. And so this is a little bit of what you're getting into there. So Chad and I, when we spoke at NAIOP in last November in Seattle, one of the things we talked about was the merger of what's going on right now with rail, right? And so because of the increased volume of everything that's being pushed to the northern part of Mexico, and how some people are comparing this visually to like a tree trunk, right, with the roots being Mexico and it growing into the United States and the branches coming out of that for industrial real estate and for different stops along the way for rail as it goes into Canada. So with saying that, do you see a scenario where as we decrease the efficiency of ports and we move more west to east and all that kind of stuff, where do you see a scenario where with optionality in mind, we push things south into Mexico to try to skip the ports altogether to then use or take advantage of the rail going into this country? Do you think that's an option?
It certainly is an option. The challenge we have is people kind of in their brain think that Mexico is centrally located. Mexico, particularly the west coast of Mexico, is west coast oriented. It's very, very west. Mexico is only closer to 23% of the American consumers, as opposed to the East Coast, where there's 77. So if you look at the Dominican Republic versus Mexico, the Dominican Republic is closer to 77% of the U.S. consumers, as opposed to Mexico's closer to 23%. So Mexico is certainly a great solution. You bring it in to the port, you go straight to Monterrey, and then up by rail. It's a great pathway, and it does avoid the ports that have this automation ban that's put on there by the union. And so that is a very viable option. The challenge is you got a lot of ground to travel, and what we know is traveling by water is about half the cost of traveling by rail, and rail is less than half of the cost by traveling by truck. So coming in and using truck up is not a good option. Coming in using rail up makes sense, but it makes more sense to get it into the East Coast and the Gulf by water, if you can do that. And if what you can do is process the material in the Dominican Republic, for example, and then have it come up and just offloaded and gone, no real processing, no container breaking, just get it gone. There's some opportunities, even without the automation, of increasing the productivity of the ports. So optionality is a key issue here. I guarantee you, every transportation company, every company that uses the East Coast is really concerned about how we're going to get the product in if they do go on strike. The threat of a strike results in hundreds of millions of dollars being spent to look at, okay, we're going to move that to the West Coast, but then we get to the West Coast, now we got to bring it all the way across by land. And so it's a real challenge. So optionality is an important topic, but you want to do optionality to give yourself greater resilience, not cover your bets if something goes haywire like a strike. So it's optionality is the correct approach. We also want to use optionality with our sourcing. It says, let's not get everything from one location. Let's not put all our eggs in one basket. Let's spread our eggs out. And therefore, we have the greater capability to get through these bumps. Goodness sakes, Houston was shut down for 6 days for hurricane last month. This month, I'm living in North Carolina. I had trouble at my beach house with rain. I'm having trouble with my Raleigh house with trees falling down because we've had so much rain. So the natural disasters have an impact. Global warming has an impact on our ability to get the ships in and out and when we want and how we want. So it's a real a sticky wicket, and it's difficult.
On the top. Oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to touch on a second issue that's having a major impact as well. So if you're, Chad, still on the subject we're on, go ahead.
I'd be going somewhere a different
Okay,
direction, sort
good.
of a different direction. So go ahead.
So the second topic is the Supreme Court made a decision, which is kind of like duh. When the three of us went to high school, we used to call it civics class. I don't know what they call it now. They used to call it civics class when I took it. They said there's three branches of the government. There's the legislative branch, there's the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So that's what the Constitution says. That's what we're supposed to have. Well, starting about 20 years ago, the executive branch said the legislative branch doesn't have enough time to make all the rules that we need. And so they created an administrative branch. And so according to how the U.S. works now, there's the executive branch, there's the legislative branch, there's the judicial branch, then there's the administrative branch. And the administrative branch is all the rules and regulations and constraints that administrative bureaucrats have made up these laws. The legislative group did not make these laws. Administratives are affecting hours that truckers can drive, impacting safety, and doing all these rules and so forth. Well, the Supreme Court said the administrative branch doesn't exist. That's not part of the Constitution. We have three groups on the Constitution. So all that regulation stuff is going to go away. And so there's going to be some big battles. If one party gets in, another party gets in, they're going to put the pedal to the metal, and we're going to free up industry, which is going to reduce inflation and allow the economy to move forward without all that administrative stuff. So those are two big deals that are impacting what's going on in supply chain and the ability of the supply chain to be able to do what it's supposed to do at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm all for eradicating middle management as a sector in general, and especially if we could get rid of a whole department, that's great news in my mind, because the red tape and the bureaucracy is horribly inefficient.
Yes.
I wanted to talk on the onshoring specifically. So there's a lot of manufacturing underway right now in North America, but it's mostly EV facilities or data centers or semiconductor chips like TSMC and Phoenix and battery production. There's very little outside of those main drivers. Are you hearing from anybody that's saying we should make textiles, or we should make widgets, or we should start onshoring more conventional consumer goods? Or is that still going to be made off seas in China, the world's factory? Or are you hearing from anyone that's saying, let's start manufacturing everything in North America?
No, I'm not hearing anyone who looks at the economics making those types of decisions. When labor is an important component in the cost of manufacturing, there's no way in the world we're going to bring that back to the U.S. Now, can we bring it back to North America? Well, Mexico is about half the cost of the U.S., but China is about 15% less than Mexico. But there's places in South America that are half of the cost of Mexico. Okay, and so if we're really we're using our head, looking at where labor is an important component, you're not going to be even bringing it to Mexico. You're not going to bring it to Canada. You're not going to bring it to the U.S. You're going to go to Latin America, and there's a lot of good sources down there for shoes and clothing and so forth. Now, when the labor becomes less and less and less important in the manufacturing, for example, when you're making semiconductors or when you're making high-tech products, in those situations, then there's a potential to bring that back. But you're not going to bring back something that's being manufactured now by a person who's being paid $2 an hour and pay that person $20 an hour and expect it to get done at a reasonable cost. It's simply the economics don't pay. But in addition to labor, the cost of real estate is much, much, much higher. And so your fixed cost of that is higher. So are we leaving China? Yes, we are leaving China, and we're going to continue to leave China. The problem with leaving China is they're very smart. What they've done is tied up a lot of the raw materials. So you find a company that says, okay, men's underwear is a category. we manufacture that. Let's say the Chad, Matt, and Jim company manufactures that in China. Our board tells us to get out of China. So what we do is we take the underwear out of China and we move it to Vietnam. Great move, okay? Because we were importing $100 million worth of underwear from China, and now we're going to import $100 million worth of China from Vietnam. Great move. However, did we remove $100 million from the China control? No, we didn't. Why? Because the fabric is made in China. The elastic is made in China. The packaging is made in China. So we thought we took $100 million out of China because we're now buying it from Vietnam. But the fact of the matter is, Vietnam bought 700 million, or whatever the numbers I was using, bought 70% of that product as raw materials coming out of China. So China still makes all the packaging, all the elastic, and all the fabric. And so you haven't really moved what you thought you moved, because we need to look not at the place we bought from the manufacturer. We got to look at end to end. So who grew the cotton, who made it into fabric, who dyed the fabric, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so just, quote, moving out of China doesn't give us that much relief, but it's a start. But we need to look at this much more robustly and truly look at what is the total landed cost, which includes everything from the raw material, the manufacturer, the transport, the delivery. What is the total delivered cost of the items? And there, what we can find is that, taking it out of China and moving it to manufacture in Vietnam isn't quite as great a deal as we thought we had. And so it's a challenge. And when you do that, guess what? Vietnam ports don't have adequate capacity to ship the products. And so now the product winds up sitting in Vietnam for an extra 3 weeks. And now I got empty store shelves because the underwear is sitting in a container in Vietnam.
So with that, Jim, with that scenario playing itself out, because you and I have had this conversation before about this whole final assembly happening, right? Where you move your final assembly elsewhere to try to mitigate risk, thinking originally that you'd move all of it, but really not understanding the impact, like you just mentioned, walking us through those different steps of, you may have final assembly even on this side of the hemisphere, let's say in Mexico or elsewhere, even in the United States, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of the components are still coming from China or nearby. So with that saying that, what are you hearing right now? What are the strategies that you're hearing people come up with as they try to strategize what optionality looks like, as they try to do this whole reshoring, nearshoring, all of that? Given what you just mentioned, because what I keep hearing is that, container rates are back to kind of pre-pandemic levels. Although I know they've risen a little bit lately. I think I just heard recently they're in that $7,000 container range versus $3,500 in kind of that general range when you look at TEUs. So when you're thinking about those kinds of scenarios, what are you hearing from business owners and from leaders of industry that you are in contact with regularly as to how they're now shifting their supply chain strategies to fit into this new world order, given the complexity that you just mentioned?
So the philosophy that was predominant in 2021, 2022 was China plus one. And the China plus one philosophy said, I want to take something like half of my volume out of China. That lasted until the issue of the Red Sea and Taiwan came to the surface, and China's support of the Russia invasion of Ukraine. And that resulted in companies changing their philosophy from China plus one to ABC, where ABC is anywhere but China. And that is the predominant mindset today, ABC. And how can we get as much as possible? And what we're finding is companies are taking sizable investments and taking them to Africa, where there is labor, there is infrastructure in place, and they're building factories in Africa for the manufacturing of products. There's companies in Africa that are growing substantially to produce products with labor that cost about half of what you can get in South America. So it's a very, very lucrative environment. with new factories, and they're still putting automation in there to handling a lot of the activity. So changing the flow of goods from China to the West Coast and then by rail to the East to going from Africa directly into the East Coast is a real slam dunk that also avoids the Suez Canal and the problem we're having down in the Red Sea. And so it's really a win-win-win, just like it is going down specifically the East Coast of South America and moving down to Argentina and Brazil, because it doesn't have to go through a canal. It doesn't get near any people that are shooting rockets at us, and it really works well. So the challenge we're having is the elections in South America, well, the elections in the world. I think we covered last time that there's more political elections in 2024 than any other year in history, and it won't be this number of elections until 2046 again. So the whole world is re-electing their officers, and we have the situation like we see in Venezuela. We have the situation in France where you have this, and then they have this, and they have that, and there's that lack of stability. And so companies are having a hard time developing the right playbook. And so we're a good procurement strategy, say 7 years ago, was I knew where I was going to produce this product line in 2024 and 2025, and then in 2026 and 27 I was going to make this shift, and then 27 and 28 we're going to make this shift, and then 29 and 30 you're going to make this shift. And there was a plan where we were going to be heading into the better locations from a cost of manufacture and a cost to get it delivered point of view. But now, oh my goodness, who planned 5 years? Are you kidding me? I mean, the world with the amount of uncertainty, we have no idea what 5 years is going to look like. And so what we need to do is we need to keep our options open. And so let's say it's going to be here, let's say it's going to be here, and say it's going to be here. And how do we cover our bets without winding up, blowing our wallet out the top of the roof? I mean, we really need to spend time thinking about this strategically and seeing what can we control as opposed to what is being controlled by, some military group or some, political switch that changes how things are taking place. So political stability is important, financial stability, controlling inflation. Those are all supply chain topics because they're big deals, and they change the way we do business.
Yeah, I want to touch. Oh, go ahead, Matt. I'll go after.
No, please go ahead, Chad. Go ahead.
One thing we talked about last time, Jim, was just the economic war that we're facing with China, mostly. And you could maybe make an argument that we're on the precipice of World War III right now with actually military forces, but we're definitely still in an economic war with China. And if we're going to start imposing massive tariffs on everything that they export and import into North America, is it retaliatory for them to just do the same and then they start putting massive tariffs on? And then do we start getting into a tariff war? And then I guess if that does happen, what does that look like?
Well, that definitely is what's going to happen. I mean, if you if I put a tariff on Matt, and I would expect that he wouldn't put a tariff back on me, I'm kind of naive. I mean, do unto others as they would do unto you is kind of how that works. And so the question is, which party was benefiting the most by the trade? Now, the reason the Republicans and Democrats in the United States agree on tariffs to China is because China is the one that is really coming out on the trade to the U.S. And so what's happening is the middle class in China is getting wealthier by the trade to the U.S., and the middle class in the United States is getting less wealthy because the standard of living in China is going up. That means the goods we're buying are going up. That means we have inflation here. But the reality is, if you look at globalization and you look at the theory of specialization and economies of scale, the volumes we're producing are so high that we can stop buying from China and go to South America, go to Mexico, go to the Dominican Republic, and we can get some really nice pricing. And so with the increase of the cost in China of doing business, us putting the tariff on them doesn't hurt that much because we have a South America that we can buy it from and get really good prices. Where is China going to take all that volume? They have no place else to take it. I mean, the United States has been, I mean, goodness sakes, you go to a store, you pick up, oh, that's a nice, oh, made in China. Oh, gee, look at that. That's made in China. I mean, we all have seen that. And the shirt, I mean, where was the shirt made? I mean, I don't know. So it's a real issue that who's going to be hurt the most? Will they retaliate? Absolutely. Do we have a choice? I hate tariffs. I love free trade. But when the other guys are cheating, you can't play fair. We decide, we're going to have a boxing match and you're going to be fair and I'm going to start coming in with low blows. Well, you can't box like that. You can't, I mean, they got to stop the fight. I'm cheating. And if someone's cheating, they got to stop them. And that's what we're doing with China. And the best way to avoid a military war is the economic war. And we all would prefer an economic war over a shooting war. And so at least everyone I know would prefer that. I'm not sure everyone says that, but I believe that. And so we're going to have an economic war as long as they're hitting us with the low blows.
So, Jim, a follow-up to that, prior to me being in commercial real estate, I was in supply chain and spent many years in China. And I was there early enough in that process, let's call it 15 years ago, probably approaching more my first time in a business capacity being in China, probably closer to 18 years ago. When you look at that, it was really prior to what we've seen now as kind of the boom happening that I've seen in places like Shenzhen, for example, where I tell people it's like living out in real time, the Industrial Revolution kind of happening in front of your eyes, right? Where Shenzhen, for context, call it 60, 70 years ago, was a city of about 50,000 people. And now there's 18 million, and it's right across the border with Hong Kong. And now that's becoming an economic center for China. I mention that because when you're there and witnessing this, Shenzhen now has last I checked, 4 out of the top 10 tallest buildings in the world. The wealth that is in that area is incredible. And that's happening in a lot of major cities in China. You have the tier 1 cities, as we call them in China, where that's where a lot of the wealth is concentrated. So with the population of China, the increasing amounts of wealth that exists there, the rise of the middle class, if I'm a manufacturer of goods, let's say Nike or Adidas, or I'm just thinking of shoes here as an example, I would think to even maintain part of my strategy being that I leave part of my manufacturing there, if not all of it, because I can still ship it to the United States and elsewhere around the world. But I've got a huge consumer base there in China itself, right? And so what are companies like that? I mean, it seems to me like that's going to be a tension of, do I leave China in the first place when my consumer base is now increasingly in Asia? What does that look like?
Well, that's a great topic, Matt, and it's for the economists to work on that one. Us supply chain guys, our job is to get the products that we can sell to the market where they're going to be sold at the closest to the time schedule that we've been promised and at a cost that is minimal. And how companies make a decision, will us getting into a tariff war hurt brands that are selling substantially in China? Yes. Will they make more money on the domestic market because they're buying it from South America and it's proving profitable? Yes. So the brands have a real challenge. I mean, you mentioned Nike. I mean, that's a marvelous global brand. And if the market in China goes south on them, or Apple, the impacts on Apple right now with the China putting up some of these walls to Apple, it's a huge impact on the company. But the fact of the matter is, we're not really trying to look at the the wealth of companies based on the strategy they deploy. What we're trying to look at is how about the consumer? That's who we really need to be. As supply chain people, we need to take care of this consumer, make sure they can get the product when they want it, where they want it, at a cost that's reasonable, and that's our job. The economists need to be looking at this global balance thing and all that stuff. And by golly, it seems like they've done that fairly well in the past. And are they going to upset the apple cart is the question. But it's not the economics of the consumer or the supply chain that's impacting that. It's more on policy. So I think it all starts with policy. And the best policy, in my view, is that we all play fair. And there's free trade and you do whatever. However, that's naive when you start thinking about there are bad actors that are going to cheat. The amount of money laundering that's coming in through Mexico into the United States now, a lot of the transportation from Mexico to the U.S. has the cartels involved, and it's a very dangerous type of environment. And so, how do we balance all those things at once? Hey, I'm a supply chain guy. I understand that, but I can't solve some of those bigger problems. I don't even understand some of those bigger problems. But as a company doing its job, it needs to take care of its consumers and its stockholders, and there requires a balance between exporting, importing, and where we sell our product.
Yeah, there's so much as you're talking about that. It's infinitely complex to try and put all these puzzle pieces together. You've got the supply chain side, and then you've got geopolitical risk, and then potential wars, and all the droughts happening in Panama and Suez. Like it's so infinitely complex. It's hard to really grasp how to actually handle it. So I can see why you need to be following this diligently. What are some of the major things that you are saying to people right now? Is there a singular message of, is it you just need to have optionality, or how are you advising people to stay on top of all these moving parts that seem to be changing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, so I am a strong believer in insightfulness, having insights into what's happening. And so what I think we need to do is we need to have a really high quality business intelligence group that is telling us what is really happening, what is happening to the markets, what's the impact on our profitability, what's the impact on the cost of the customer, what's our ability to serve the customer, and take that business intelligence of what's really happening globally, and then say, okay, how can I gain insight from that? How can I mine that information and understand where are we going? The business insight tell us where we've been. Okay. And now what we need to do is take that and say, where are we going? With that insight, then what I need to do is I need to be innovative based on my insight. I believe this, and this is going to happen in the market, and therefore I'm going to have this innovation. Now, this isn't an innovation necessarily of inventing a new product or inventing a new technology. This is how we do it, how we ship it, how we move it, where we purchase it. And so we need to work on that innovation. So I see business insight, business intelligence, insight, and then innovation. Unfortunately, what's happened for the last 5 years in the United States, the level of innovation is way down. The reason innovation is so far down is because we're firefighting. We got everyone trying to handle this. We got to do this. We have to do this. We have to do this. One of the reasons Matt got out of supply chain probably is because he was going crazy. I mean, there was nonstop chaos. Okay. And so now he left there and went into real estate. I'm not sure that was the smartest
That's a lateral move.
Chaos move. Yeah. We could argue on that one. But the supply chain is absolutely a zoo. And you're changing direction every week. So what that resulted in is a reduction of innovation. That's what we got to get back to. We got to get back to innovation. And so that is what allows us to improve and to make our operations run better, use our labor better, use our transportation dollar better, use the right amount of inventory. And that's what's really critical. So what the message I'm having with my clients are, come on, innovation. We need to really take a step back and think about what can we do to deal with this mess we have and still do well, even though we're not sure what the future looks like. And I think that's really, really, really critical. So I think a big term, a big way to think about things is innovation. If we're looking at real estate in Japan, almost all new warehouses are multi-story. In the United States, we stopped building multi-story warehouses. It's back when in the 1940s. They're all single level now, and we go higher inside. But what they're doing in Japan is they got 30-foot ceilings, and then they got 5 floors of that. And that's allowing them to use land better. Land's very expensive in Japan, and so that allows you to reduce the cost of warehousing. So that's innovative. That's really cool. But so we need to have those types of innovation. We've got to think outside the box. We got to think, where are we doing this? Obviously, where a lot of e-com people are trying to locate warehouses is where the high population densities, so you travel less far. Well, but if you travel less far, you're going to be in very expensive real estate. So you've saved on transportation, but now you've really taken a hit in the land cost. So what can we do to reduce the land cost? Well, let's go up. Let's do multi-story warehousing, and we buy less land. We get more square footage in our warehouses to do our thing. So, when I'm big on looking at the total picture. The old story, what's real estate about? It's about location, location, location. Well, I think real estate has it partially right. And I do think L's are important, but I think we need location. We need to look at land. We got to look at labor. We got to look at leadership. And then we got to look at the lighthouse. The lighthouse is the computer that controls the whole thing. So I've gone from the 3 L's of real estate to the 5 L's of what we need to do from a supply chain point of view. You got to be in the right location. So the real estate people are right. Location's number one. If you're in the wrong location, you can build the right facility and have the right labor and still not be good. So you got to be in the right location. Then you have to have the right land in that location, and the lands have to be available, and you got to be able to afford it. Then you got to be able to provide the labor you need, or the automation that replaces the labor. Then you need to have leadership so that you have a vision as to where you're heading. And then you need to have the lighthouse, all the computer systems that control everything that's taking place in a flow from a supply digital network point of view. And now we can really make something happen. And so I think a good thing to think about is to go from the 3 L's of real estate to the 5 L's of supply chain.
So with the 5 L's that you just mentioned, so this is what Chad and I do every day, right? We focus on industrial real estate, and a lot of the occupiers of large industrial buildings are, when you get outside of the Amazons and Walmarts and Targets of the world, tend to be 3PLs, right? So as you talk about all the optionality and the reshoring and everything we've just discussed, what are you seeing in terms of, like, because we've all heard about inventories right sizing, after the pandemic and because of consumer behaviors and everything else going on that affects that. What do you think are markets that are emerging or continue to grow when we talk about strategic locations, whether it be because of the location itself, the labor, and all the 5 L's you just mentioned, for people like Chad and I and those that are listening, in terms of either because you're an investor in real estate or because you're a practitioner as a broker or a developer? What are some of the areas that you're seeing that are growing in industrial real estate for the reasons you just mentioned?
Well, there's it depends upon the commodity and so forth, but in general, the answer to the question is Southwest, which used to be LA, but because of the labor issue, that's now become Reno, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City. Okay, so LA has now moved because of the labor issue, but it's still kind of Southwest. We have something that's kind of middle of the country in the South that kind of looks like Dallas, Fort Worth, might be Austin, might be Houston, but that is a hot location. Atlanta still remains very, very hot, even though we're finding labor challenges there. something in the Northeast, but you can't find any land in New York or New Jersey. So Pennsylvania's looking good. West Virginia's kicking in. Sometimes we're going upstate New York. Sometimes we're going down in the Baltimore area and Maryland. But there's a pod there, and then there's a Midwest thing. Used to be Chicago, but costs in Chicago are so high, it's moved over to Indianapolis and sometimes even as far over as Columbus. So we have five. It's the Salt Lake, the Dallas, the Atlanta to Pennsylvania, and the Indiana. Those are the kind of the places you think about the most. That gives you the best trade-off between service and cost, and is true. Now, there's still going to be some people that have a good reason to be in Illinois because everything's coming in from the West Coast on rail, and Chicago is the center of that. There's some people that want to be up in Minnesota or over in Denver to cover the North Dakota and South Dakota and Idaho and those places because of the growth up there. But that's in general what we're thinking about. And so then the question becomes, how many do we have? Do we have five? Do we have six? Do we have three? Do we have two? If you're going to pick two, you're not going to pick Dallas and Salt Lake. You're going to pick, Salt Lake and Pennsylvania or Atlanta. You're going to kind of balance it out. And you can do modeling on that. The modeling that's done used to be done with precision and really, really, really was important. In fact, my prior firm, we used to do a lot of network modeling and made a lot of money on those projects. But the fact of the matter is, you're typically modeling 5 years out, and what you're getting for data is just some wild guess. You have no idea. Someone says, well, we're going to go 10% a year. I said, is that going to be in bigger orders or is that going to be in more orders? They said, we don't know. Well, it makes a big difference. Okay. If you tell me it's going to be 10% growth and it's going to be in 10% more orders, that's a whole different design of that warehouse and the requirements from a real estate point of view than if you're going to go trend by having the same, instead of bigger orders, you got now more orders. Those are two different design criteria, and they're going to take you in a totally different direction. And so we really have a problem doing that well. And so what that results is, when the answer is we really don't know, best thing to do is to go with a 3PL, because the 3PL is the one that's going to build a building and have a position. And what I like to do then is I like to go with a 3PL that's nationwide, and I have a contract that says I'm going to be in Dallas. However, if I want to move from Dallas to Memphis because of this reason, you're going to allow me to do that without a penalty. And so, I want to have the flexibility in the contracts and the optionality of a 3PL. So the 3PLs, they have done marvelous. Now, last year wasn't a good year because there wasn't growth, because when COVID hit, everyone put more inventory in. When COVID quieted down, everyone took all that excess inventory out. And so there wasn't the growth last year in 3PL that we've seen traditionally for the last 20 years. But that'll come back. I mean, because the growth of 3PL is going to be because there's more goods being shipped and more goods being consumed. And so that will occur. So 3PL is still going to be a healthy industry going forward, even though 2023 was a lousy year.
I know you have a call coming up in a couple minutes, so I want to end by asking you to put on your author hat for a minute, and just wanted to see if you have any books in progress right now, if you're working on anything or anything in plans.
Absolutely not. So I've written 31 books, and the 31st book was my first book by Amazon that went through the Amazon process. And what we have is a system where it's very difficult to be profitable writing books. So that doesn't mean I've cut down on my writing. I've actually increased my writing. But what you're doing is you're doing the blogs. And so the blogs is what's really important. And that's what drives search engine optimization to your websites and so forth. So the marketing has changed from a book environment. The books are how you get fame. Blogs is how you make money. And so it's a different world than it was back in the 1990s to 2010. I wrote a book a year, and that was a very wise use of my time. Now I do them 500 words at a time, that creates the attention in the search engine optimization. I am really writing a lot about the reinvention of work, how work and labor is totally different than it was before COVID. I'm spending a lot of time writing about ergonomics and industrial safety. I'm spending a lot of time writing about what's going on in transportation and freight forwarding and the technology that drives it. Back to Matt's comment earlier, I'm doing a lot of work on AI because there's such huge potential. The Fortune study that recently done, 52% of all CEOs don't really see the potential in AI.
Oh.
I mean, duh. I mean, that's like, saying, well, my company doesn't believe in using smartphones, or we don't believe in using Microsoft spreadsheets. So, hello, how do you stay in business? I mean, AI has got such huge potential across supply chain, across the entire business network. And so what I'm trying to do is help executives understand that it ain't your grandpa's company anymore. It needs this innovation, and a lot of the innovation is going to come as a result of AI and technology. And so this is a great environment for people that are innovative and creative and want to change the way we do business. So that's what I'm writing about.
Is your blog publicly available, or is it to members?
Yeah, it's publicly available. I publish them on LinkedIn, and so you can go on LinkedIn every Tuesday, every Thursday. I do one. And boy, sometimes it's Wednesday night and I think, oh, got to write one tonight, But I keep a blue folder over here where I have my ideas. And so in the last week, I've written 2 on peak 24, 2024 peak. Someone says, well, when does peak begin? Well, which peak? We're just past the back to school peak, and now we're into the Halloween peak, and then we're into the peak for the folks that are doing B2B, because you got to get the product to the B so they can then do it to the C, and then the B to C starts the peak starting sometime in November. And then in January, we have the peak of the returns. And so there's peak. So the peak moves up the supply chain. And so the question is, how do we manage that? How do we manage the labor? In October in my warehouse, I need 300 people. In September, I only needed 150. How do we make that work? It's a real interesting challenge and something that there's some interesting solutions out there. So it's really cool to see, for me to think about, okay, someone's going to read this today, and now they need to do something innovative next week. How can I help them the most way? And so I'm kind of pushing innovation on them. And think about this. And it's really cool to see the response we get. I mean, it's not unusual for me to 12 hours after I release a blog to have 2,000 people commented on it already or something. And so that's kind of cool. I like that.
So Jim, I don't want to speak for Chad, but maybe a third, because this is our part 2. Maybe a part 3 could be talking about, because this is what Chad and I do, right? And our listeners are thinking about volumes coming in out of warehouses and the rise of AI. Chad and I are big believers in AI and use it a lot. I know he does as well. I mean, that would automation, AI, peak seasons, all that would be fascinating. I don't know. That sounds interesting to me. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, there's one topic that I'd really like to explore in a part 3, if you're up for it as well, Jim, and piggybacking on what Matt said is the movement of inventory management from just in time to just in case, and how that's even cyclical. That's one thing that I'd really like to explore. So if you're up for it, a part 3 would be fantastic.
Well, why don't we start right now? No, I love the way you guys handle these things, and I hope it's a lot of value to the your audience, and I'd be happy to do a number 3. So yeah, let's think about just in time, just in case, just to not steal my thunder, but both are wrong. Neither one is right, and so how do you say, well, there's only 2, just in time and just in case. Well, if you think that, you got a problem. That's not right. So yeah, there's something more to talk about there. certainly the technology and AI and where that's going is just so exciting. I mean, every day I'm going, oh my goodness, look at this. This is cool. And yeah, it's very cool what stuff's going on. So yeah, be happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, even Vish said, thanks for the awesome guest on this call. Salvador said very valuable information. So you're already getting some great feedback from people on here. Part 3 sounds awesome. I know you have a call coming right in, so we'll let you go, Jim, but we'll put a link to your LinkedIn. So, because I definitely want to follow along with those articles that you're putting out. And then offline, we'll try to line up a part 3 on this.
Great. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Matt. Good to see you guys.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.